Hi, and welcome back to the Climate Finance Training Kit by UNEP CCC, the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. I am Thibaut Pasquet. I am myself a climate finance and energy expert, and I will walk you through the topic of the day, which is transformational change and sustainable development co-benefits. Transformational change is the notion that a system can radically, abruptly change from one state to another if imposed the right way by the stakeholders. The idea is to reach a new state, in this case in society, through a paradigm shift where it disrupts the established high carbon pathways and business models to go to a more sustainable, low carbon way of functioning. And that is through some abrupt radical changes. To boil down the definition of transformational change to some more practical, bare bones definition, we can identify three main factors, which are usually the ones we look at in projects or the mitigation projects we might be looking at, or adaptation, that really can define whether transformational change is happening or not. The first one is that the change is disrupting the established pathways that are usually carbon dependent way of making business. Now, the second aspect is that it is triggered by actors that will innovate through technology or new business models, and in their wake take other actors to follow their lead, and the change is going to spread out in an ecosystem, in a society, in a field of business, until the multi-level system is all affected by this change. Finally, one of the key notions of transformational change is that it overcomes barriers to innovate from a high carbon society to a low carbon society and transform the system. Now, if you look at the following graph that we have, we can sort of place different societies on a chart that has on its axis sustainable development and transformational change, how developed society is and how sustainable that development is, and how transformational or non-transformational the change is. Basically, when both factors are achieved on the top right of this graph, you can see it is a low carbon society carried by innovative technologies and a change that has affected every layer of society. Now, on the opposite, for a change that is non-structural if the actions are not successful and the development is non-sustainable, we reach a state of ecosystem and land degradation with pollution, depreciation, etc. Now, when sustainable development is not matched by transformational change in the way the business models are implemented, efficiency is outpaced by growth, which means the negative effect of this growth will not be outweighed by a higher efficiency or that is brought about by transformational change. On the opposite, usually an authoritarian regime will be characterized by an extremely transformational change, a shift to another society, without achieving sustainable development. So that is roughly how we can place whether transformational change is achieved or not and its link with sustainable development. Now, to be a little more practical, after looking at the transformational change, one needs to establish a theory of change, which is a more concrete approach, more project-driven, where you look at one specific intervention or project and try to gauge how and why it is expected to work. And by work, we mean how it's going to contribute to the transformational change we're trying to implement. That is basically how this brick of a project or intervention is going to fit in the whole road to the goal we're trying to achieve. To assess that, one's going to build a logic model, the LFA, which will aggregate and take in information about the context, the actors, the stakeholders, the conditions, every piece of the puzzle, if you will, of the business model, aggregate them and see how it could contribute to the success or the failure of the intervention. Once all of that is computed, you can describe using the theory of change whether the project will be a net contribution to what we're trying to achieve. When looking at the outcome of a specific intervention, as we mentioned just before, the outcomes could be explained in that how and why matrix. When looking at some characteristics, if the changes are permanent, that is, once the action is over and the project is done, are things going to revert to their original state, or are they going to stay in the state that they are? Looking at energy production, for instance, you go from a coal-based production, high carbon grid, to a solar hydro mix with low carbon emissions. Now, if you stop massively investing in it, will it revert back to coal, or is the new system sustainable in itself through the use of certain policies by lower prices for the solar energy that we've put in place? And basically, is it viable or not? Or is it going to revert back to the situation before? Similarly, we can keep the same example for the second point, which is radicality. That is, how much the action deviates from the business model as usual, from the business as usual. That is, when the business as usual is only carbon development and you introduce renewable energy, for instance, as in our last example, how much does it deviate from the expected path, and what is the scale of the change it's bringing about? Finally, abruptness. Is it a sudden change or not? Is it happening over a short time frame or a long one? And these three factors together can be used to formulate that theory of change and see whether that particular action will help achieve change and bring about the transformational change we are referring to. Now, to illustrate what we've been talking about here, because it's all a bit theoretical, we'll be looking at a more concrete example, which is a GCF, Green Climate Fund, investment criteria, which are the criteria that this major climate fund is using to fund a project or not, and to assess whether this project is going to push things in the right direction, if it is achieving transformational change or not. Now, as you can see on the presentation, we've got a few main points that the Green Climate Fund is usually looking at to assess the impact of an intervention. Impact potential, paradigm shift, sustainable development potential, needs of the recipient, country ownership, and efficiency and effectiveness. And well, we're going to delve a bit more into the details of those, but the impact potential would be how much impact per amount invested will be observed. And the impact can be quantified in many ways. Is it the share of renewable energy in the mix? Is it the access to water or to certain commodities? Is it the reduction in greenhouse gases, etc., compared to the resources that are invested in it? The more impact it is, means less resources are invested to achieve the same result. Now, the paradigm shift is a bit more theoretical. It is how much it changes from the way of doing things in business as usual to a new model, and that is obviously crucial. It linked to the theory of change we just talked about. Finally, again, sustainable development potential. That is the permanency of the change that we just talked about as well. Is it sustainable? Will it carry on afterwards? Is it a model that will not revert back to business as usual if you stop investing, for instance? Finally, what they call needs of the recipient is how much the project or the intervention matches the needs of the country or municipality, which can be expressed in NDCs, nationally determined contributions, or other reports and strategy that shows that the country is aiming at those targets, and the project is actually helping them on that way to achieving their goals. And that is one of the main focuses of GCF, obviously. Now, country ownership is also extremely dependent of that. It is how much the country itself is involved in the process. Is it just a foreign intervention, or does it actually have country involvement, support, and ownership in the end? Will the project pass on to them afterwards? That is usually a key factor for the sustainability of the project itself. If the project is not really connected to the country's needs and country's administration, it usually falls apart afterwards. And finally, efficiency and effectiveness, which, well, or self-explanatory, but how well the project would be implemented. Now, these 6 main criteria are usually how the GCF and other climate funds, for that matter, will gauge the potential success of an intervention, of a project, and whether it can achieve transformational change or not. Now, just a bit more on the GCF's paradigm shift that we've been mentioning, because the GCF example is really relevant in that regard. The paradigm shift is the way that one activity or one intervention can actually impact and change the way things are done in a country, in a certain ecosystem, and how it is going to catalyze beyond the project's impact into other projects and replication. That's how much overall impact the project will have beyond its expected targets. Now, these benefits are measured with these 3 metrics, at least in the case of GCF. That is scale, depth, and sustainability. Now, scale is literally the impact that the project will have within and beyond the scope of the intervention. So how much scaling up, how much replication we'll see. Whereas the depth is more of how much the project or intervention represents a shift in behavior compared to business as usual. How much is going to change the society or the ecosystem where it's implemented. And finally, sustainability is again how sustainable it is, how it's going to be stable over time and not revert back to the state it was in before. These 3, scale, depth, sustainability, really match the criteria we just saw before for theory of change. That is how permanent it is, how abrupt, and well, how radical it is. Now, if we go a bit further in the GTF paradigm shift criteria, you can see on the screen the matrix with which they're going to assess scale, depth, and sustainability, the 3 factors we just mentioned. And here you can see an example on your screen of well, reduced emissions and increased resilience. So it is both mitigation and adaptation, if we speak in terms in climate terms, compared to systemic change and how much they feed into each other, backed up by projects and programs. So how the institutions and the private sector can play along with the projects that are put in place to really ensure this sustainability, depth, and scale of each project. Otherwise, with the lack of cooperation of the stakeholders, it usually fails to achieve all 3 of these goals. When looking a bit more into the GCF's paradigm shift considerations, we can visualize how many different factors go into it, all to achieve the increased climate resilience, which is well, basically what wants to be achieved by a specific adaptation or mitigation project. You can see all the different factors feeding into it. Innovation from the technical and private sector, the scalability, replicability, the contribution to strengthening knowledge, or that is to spread out and replicate what's been done, the sustainability of the outcome beyond the completion of the intervention, that is after the term of the project, the market development and transformation, that is how much the market is going to be affected and changed after that intervention, and finally the potential for strengthened frameworks and policies, that is obviously the government side and the regulatory side, which is crucial to the success of these initiatives. And all of these we can see are feeding into this adaptation objective. Finally, if we look at the sustainable development potential, which is one of the other indicators that the Green Climate Fund is using to gauge the potential success of projects, we can identify other co-benefits indicators that are, well, crucial really indicators of success beyond what the project is aiming for, beyond the targets. So say again, if we take an example of energy and the main objective of the project is to decarbonize the grid and reduce the carbon emissions by putting in place solar, say. Now, if this project has the co-benefits of creating more jobs and having more affordable energy and a more stable energy price, because solar energy prices don't fluctuate as much as fossil ones, well, we achieve multiple co-benefits that we can analyze using the NDCs, the various SDGs, so Sustainable Development Goals, gauge each of these co-benefits according to them. And we see that the project has many more reasons to be sustainable because it feeds into many more sustainable development goals beyond its own first target. And so these were the main takeaway points from that specific Green Climate Fund example, which is, as one of the main climate funds, can be really used as a template for how transformational change should be phrased in proposals, in asking for financing or putting together a business case, how one could gauge the potential benefits of a project and how this specific intervention would achieve the transformational change that we're aiming for. It's basically how to inscribe one intervention within a larger strategy to reach a far-reaching goal. That's the key point, and I think the most important to remember on this topic. I hope it's been useful, clear, and understandable for everyone. And thank you very much for your attention. Have a good day.